Topic 1. The manufactured villain was Napoleon, framed by history. History is written by the victors. That quote gets thrown around a lot. But when it comes to Napoleon Bonaparte, it might be the most literal truth in the entire history of Europe. We think we know Napoleon, the short man with a big ego, a power-hungry dictator who tried to conquer the world and lost. But here's the first question. Who gave you that story? Because Napoleon never got to write his version. He didn't die on a throne. He didn't pass his empire to a son. He died in exile. Under watch, his letters censored, his name mocked, and the people who did write the story. The British, the very empire that fought him for decades, that feared his rise, and that once victorious, had every reason to humiliate him publicly. The myth of the short man. Let's start with the easiest lie to unravel. Napoleon wasn't short. He was 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 7 inches in modern height. In early 1800s France, that was average, even slightly tall. So where did the tiny emperor idea come from? British propaganda. After Napoleon's defeat, the British press flooded Europe with political cartoons, Napoleon standing on boxers, Napoleon looking up at his generals, Napoleon throwing tantrums like a child. It was hilarious. It was effective, and it worked so well. We're still laughing 200 years later. But why does this matter? Because if you can turn a man into a joke, you don't need to explain why you defeated him. You don't need to justify how you fought a decade-long war that cost millions of lives. You just say, he was ridiculous. And the world nods along. The laws he left behind, but no one mentions. Here's something strange. Even the countries that hated him kept his laws. The Napoleonic Code is still the legal foundation in France. It influenced laws in Italy, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and even Latin America. This is a man who reshaped modern civil rights, removed feudal privileges, codified religious freedom, simplified legal codes, created secular public education, established equality before the law for men, at least. Yet most history books will give this a paragraph, maybe 2. Why? Because praising Napoleon means admitting the villain changed the world for the better, and that's inconvenient for the narrative, the madman strategy. Another common trope, Napoleon was irrational, hot-headed, delusional, consumed by power. Sounds familiar? It should. Because that's the exact same strategy used on leaders every time they threaten the established order. Call them crazy, mock their physical appearance, then erase their accomplishments. This wasn't just personal, it was political warfare. It was narrative assassination. Napoleon didn't just lose the war. He lost the right to explain why he fought it. Napoleon never got to tell his side. Think about this. He spent his final years on a rock in the Atlantic, St. Helena, surrounded by British guards, with no public, no advisors, no audience. The letters he wrote were intercepted and censored. Even his memoirs had to be smuggled out in pieces. And when he died, his body was returned to France 19 years later. Do you really believe the story we have is neutral, or was it engineered? Let's ask the real questions. Why do we remember him as a crazy short dictator, but forget he invented the modern legal system? Why do we know he invaded Russia and failed, but never learn why he went there in the first place? Why is every film version of Napoleon a cartoon, a villain, or a fool? Because it's easier that way. Easier to bury his ideas, easier to keep the spotlight on the victor's version of history. But here's the deeper fear. If we see Napoleon as more than a madman, we might start questioning what else history got wrong. So, what do you think? Was Napoleon truly a monster, drunk on power? Or was he a visionary, crushed by empires that feared change? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because in this channel, we don't just fall asleep to history. We question it. Topic 2. The blood on his hands. How far would Napoleon go for power? They called him a revolutionary. They called him a genius. But no one ever called him innocent. Because no matter how many legal codes he wrote, Napoleon Bonaparte built his empire on blood. And the question is, did he spill it out of necessity or out of design? The first massacre, Toulon, 1793, Napoleon's rise didn't begin with a law or a speech. It began with cannons. At just 24 years old, Napoleon was a low-ranking artillery officer during the siege of Toulon. The city had rebelled against the French revolutionary government and sided with the British. Napoleon offered a bold idea. Bombard the civilian areas first. It worked. The British fled, and Napoleon was promoted. But at what cost? Historians estimate that over 7,000 civilians were killed. Many of them French, not soldiers, not spies. Mothers, fathers, children. The French Revolution claimed it was justice. Napoleon claimed it was strategy. But here's the truth. No textbook wants to say. His career began with a war crime, and it wouldn't be the last. The Egyptian disaster. Everyone talks about Napoleon's great expedition to Egypt. But behind the mythology was a military disaster wrapped in colonial arrogance. He went there claiming to bring enlightenment. He left after spreading death, disease, and destruction. His troops looted tombs, burned villages, and slaughtered prisoners. One of the most horrifying moments, the massacre at Jaffa, 1799. After capturing the city, Napoleon promised safety to the 4,000 Ottoman prisoners. Then changed his mind. He claimed there were too many to feed. So he had them executed en masse by bayonet and musket over 2 days. 4,000 men, no trial, no defense, just disposal. And yet this is the same man statues were built for. plague, and the propaganda lie. Napoleon also faced an outbreak of plague in Jaffa. Dozens of soldiers were infected, and do you know what he did? He visited them for the cameras, told painters to capture him touching the sick, like some kind of savior, then quietly ordered all the infected to be left behind as the army retreated. No medicine, no shelter, just death. He used dying soldiers as a photo op. Let that sink in. The human cost per victory. Napoleon wasn't reckless. He was cold, efficient. In one letter to his brother, he wrote, "It is sometimes necessary to sacrifice 30,000 men to take a capital. That's not exaggeration. That's math." During the Russian campaign alone, over 400,000 French soldiers died, and Napoleon refused to retreat until it was far too late. He watched his own men freeze to death, starve, collapse in agony, all for a march that led to nothing. Why? Because turning back would mean admitting failure. To him, the idea of victory was more valuable than human life. The silence of the dead, the most chilling part. He never apologized, never showed regret, never acknowledged the lives he ended. He praised his bravery, his strategy, his glory, but you won't find letters weeping for his fallen men, or speeches of sorrow for civilians caught in the crossfire. Instead, he once said, "A soldier must be ready to die. The only question is, how usefully." To Napoleon, people weren't people, they were pieces on a board. And when he lost, he blamed the board. So what should we make of him? He wasn't the only leader who sent people to die, but unlike others, he made it sound noble. He built cathedrals to honor himself. He crowned himself emperor. He told the world, "I am France." But how many thousands were buried beneath that crown? How many women never saw their sons again? Because Napoleon thought 30,000 men was a worthy trade. So tell me, was he a military genius or just a butcher with good PR? Was this the cost of greatness or the mask of a monster? Topic 3. Love, betrayal, and empire. The woman who knew too much. She was the only woman Napoleon ever truly loved. She was also the only one who made him cry. But in the end, he cut her out of his life quietly, ruthlessly. This is not a love story. This is about trust, power, secrets. And the woman who might have known too much, she was never meant to be an Empress Josephine de Beauharnais, wasn't a saint. She was a widow, a mother, a socialite, and a woman with complicated alliances in a dangerous time. She married Napoleon when he was still a general, not an emperor, not yet a legend, just a man in love. He wrote her letters filled with obsession and vulnerability. He worshipped her, feared her, needed her. "I don't close my eyes without seeing you. I don't speak without calling your name." But love isn't enough, not when you're building an empire. As Napoleon rose, so did the stakes. And suddenly, Josephine wasn't just his lover, she was a liability. She had friends in all the wrong place. Josephine was connected, too connected. She moved in elite circles, French nobles, Austrian diplomats, even British sympathizers. While Napoleon was at war, she was hosting salons. While he plotted battles, she listened to whispers. She knew his political plans. She knew troop movements. She knew who he feared and who he paid. She wasn't just a wife. She was a walking intelligence leak. Did she betray him? Here's where the conspiracy begins. Some modern historians suggest that the key intelligence leaks before Waterloo may have started at one of her private dinner parties. 1 month before the battle, Josephine hosted several foreign dignitaries. Among them, an Austrian envoy with known British contacts, a woman who had met with Marshal Grouchy, and a known associate of Wellington's field network. Shortly after, enemy forces began making eerily precise moves, as if they knew Napoleon's next steps. Coincidence? Or did the woman he loved accidentally or intentionally hand his enemies the map? Why didn't he kill her? This is the chilling part. Napoleon, who ordered mass executions for far less, didn't punish her. He divorced her, yes, but left her with estates, income, and a palace. He remarried a young Austrian princess for diplomacy, for an heir, for legitimacy. But even then, he kept writing to Josephine. Even when she died, he kept her portrait. Even in exile, he whispered her name. Why? Because he never stopped loving her. Even if she might have destroyed him, his new wife gave him a son. Napoleon, too, but that son was never truly his. Austria kept him, raised him, used him as a pawn. Napoleon had an heir on paper. But in reality, his bloodline was politically neutered. Was this his great strategic win, or a quiet surrender? What did he regret? Napoleon never showed weakness. Not in public, but his final writings reveal something strange. He didn't write about the Battle of Austerlitz. He didn't brag about becoming emperor. Instead, he wrote about her. "I hope she forgives me. I missed too much." He conquered Europe, but he never conquered love, and he died wondering if she had forgiven him. So, was Josephine a socialite, or a spy, a wife, or a weapon? Was she a victim of politics, or a hidden hand in one of the greatest downfalls in European history? Or maybe, just maybe, she was simply too clever, too connected, and too close to the fire. Let's ask the only question that matters. If you were her, would you stay loyal? If your husband ignored you, replaced you, used you, but you still held the key to his empire, would you keep his secrets, or trade them for survival? Topic 4. The Shadow War. Did someone want him to fail at Waterloo? The word means total defeat. But what if Napoleon didn't lose because he was outsmarted? What if he lost because someone made sure he would? The official story, it's the classic tale. Napoleon returns from exile, Europe panics. Britain, Prussia, and others form a coalition. At Waterloo, they unite and crush him. End of story, right? But this version leaves too many questions, too many perfect mistakes, too many things that shouldn't have happened but did. Let's pull at the threads. The timing that made no sense. Napoleon was famous for speed. His armies moved fast. His attacks hit before anyone was ready. But in the days leading to Waterloo, he hesitated. He paused outside Brussels. He let rain delay his artillery. He waited for troops that never arrived. And then there was Marshal Grouchy. Napoleon told Grouchy to follow the Prussians and block them from reaching Wellington. Instead, Grouchy marched in the wrong direction, ignored gunfire from the battle, never showed up. And guess who did show up, just in time? The Prussians, turning the tide. Breaking Napoleon's army. Some historians chalk it up to confusion, but others ask, how do you accidentally miss the biggest battle of your emperor's life? Was Grouchy incompetent or something worse? Marshal Grouchy had never commanded an army in the field before Waterloo. Why did Napoleon entrust him with such a critical role? Even stranger, Grouchy had close ties to several nobles who had switched sides during Napoleon's first exile. He had property in royalist regions. And after Napoleon's final fall, Grouchy was spared, quietly. No prison, no trial. He simply faded into history. Almost like someone rewarded him. Could Grouchy have been playing both sides? We may never know, but we know this. Napoleon trusted the wrong man, and it may have cost him the empire. The missing orders scandal. After the battle, Napoleon's written orders to Grouchy were mysteriously lost. They didn't appear in British records, not in Grouchy's personal files, nowhere. Only decades later did partial versions resurface in Britain, with language that made Napoleon look indecisive, confused. Some historians believe these orders were forged or altered, as part of a campaign to discredit him post-defeat. Remember, Napoleon's power didn't just come from soldiers, it came from his myth. Destroying the myth meant changing the story, and changing the story meant editing the evidence. The shadow network. Now here's where it gets darker. Napoleon had spies. So did the British. So did the Prussians. Waterloo wasn't just fought with cannonballs, it was fought with information. And some of that information, Napoleon's plans, his troop locations. His artillery was reportedly leaked before the battle. Who had access? High-level generals. And Josephine's former circle, the exact circle Napoleon had lost control of. Did a leak doom him? Was the battle already rigged? The victory that felt too convenient, the British press celebrated Waterloo like a divine miracle. Paintings, poems, statues. Wellington was a national god. But even Wellington privately admitted it was a damn close-run thing. So how did an untested coalition, with different languages, different strategies, and split command, defeat one of the greatest military minds in history? Simple answer. They got help, maybe from luck, maybe from betrayal, or maybe from a plan Napoleon never saw coming. So what really happened? Was it a military miscalculation? Or a political assassination by proxy? Did Napoleon lose Waterloo because he made mistakes? Or because someone needed him to lose no matter the cost? And if the greatest general of the century could be brought down from the inside, how many other empires have fallen the same way? Topic 5. Death or disappearance. The body that didn't match. They said Napoleon died on a remote island, sick, alone, forgotten. But what if he didn't die there at all? A tiny wind-blasted rock in the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from France, from power, from legacy. That's where Britain sent Napoleon. Not to prison, not to court, but to vanish. He died there in 1821, or so they told us. But from the moment his body was buried, the questions began. In 1961, scientists tested preserved strands of Napoleon's hair. Not once, not twice, but over 4 separate studies. Each time, they found high levels of arsenic. Slow, cumulative, intentional. And not just from the environment, but consistent with chronic poisoning who had access to his food. His drink? His medicine? Only the British guards. And his most trusted companions. Did someone want him silenced, permanently? The British governor, who hated him, Sir Hudson Lowe, appointed as Napoleon's jailer. Even British historians agree Lowe was obsessed. He isolated Napoleon, intercepted his mail, limited visitors, micromanaged every meal. Napoleon called him a torturer with manners. But the question is, did Lowe just monitor him? Or did he murder him? And if so, was it personal, or was he following orders? In 1840, 19 years after his death, France was finally allowed to retrieve Napoleon's body. But witnesses noticed a strange thing. The body was too tall. The jawline didn't match. The hands once described as thin and fine were now thick and calloused. And the uniform didn't fit. Even the coffin seemed unfamiliar. His former officers exchanged worried glances. Some believed it wasn't him. But the pressure to celebrate his return was too great. So the truth was buried again. According to a persistent theory, Napoleon never died on St. Helena. Instead, a lookalike, a valet, a loyalist, maybe even a dying soldier, was used as a decoy. Napoleon himself escaped to where? Italy. Or some say, Corsica. Letters with his handwriting surfaced years after 1821. Sightings, rumors, a man calling himself Leon. Is it fantasy? Or just a story too dangerous to verify? Who had a motive? Let's be honest, dead men don't rise. But they also don't leak secrets. Napoleon knew too much. The bribes of kings, the lies of treaties, the names of double agents, the deaths of governments that now claim victory. He was too big to let live, but too dangerous to die loudly, so they gave him a quiet death on a remote island. With no trial, no witnesses. No last words, only a coffin. Maybe his, maybe not. So how do you want to remember him? As a sick, lonely man fading away? Or as a revolutionary, leader silenced, then replaced, then mythologized? And most importantly, if the story of Napoleon's death was fabricated, what other deaths in history were staged? Drop your theory in the comments. Do you believe he really died on that island? Or did the emperor outlive his empire? Subscribe for more buried stories of history.